Hey guys, if you don't know me already, I'm Jack Baker. I'm a fantasy artist from the UK. Today I'm going to be doing a Photoshop document walkthrough of my painting Ina. Instead of watching me paint, I'm going to be going through some of the layers and talking a bit about my process whilst we do it. So this is how you used to see him with painting. I'm going to take that back to where we started. So the first thing would be my rough sketch. Now you can see this is very rough. I've sort of dodgily done the lines. I'm basically trying to get the idea for the character, the pose, what she's wearing, the background, etc. I, for some reason, generally do my rough sketches in just red. I don't know if I have an exact reason for this, it's just how I've done it. I quite enjoy doing it. And I think part of it probably is when I go back over and do a clean-up version of a sketch in black, it's easier to see my black marks over the red. So let's bring up the clean sketch. Something I should point out is between these, this rocky base in the rough sketch is completely horizontal and flat, which I changed when I brought in the clean sketch. I decided to put it on an angle to bring in a little more drama to the piece, and I think it generally helps the composition. So this is my clean sketch, which I'm focusing on clean line work, bringing in some more of the smaller details, which you can see between the rough sketch. The face was pretty much just the sort of general shape of it, and then in the clean sketch I've put in all the details with her eyes and nose and mouth and stuff. With the clean sketch I generally try and keep my lines as clean as possible. This isn't always because it shows in the final painting, but I just really enjoy doing the line work, so I try and keep it as clean as possible. With this piece I did actually keep some of the line work in the final painting, or not necessarily kept it in the final painting, but I painted over the line work, which I'm not sure if you can see in the final piece, but we'll have a look at that when we get to it. So the first thing for me was sort of planning out where I wanted my values to be. By that I mean how I'm going to structure them. So you have your light, your mid-tone and your dark tone values. It's deciding where you're going to place each value, all three of them, and make them separated from each other. So for me, I wanted the sky to be the light tones, I wanted my character to be mid-tones and my rocky base to be the dark tones. So the first thing I did was, after blocking in the background, which I used just a sort of rough square brush to do, I've gone in and blocked in the dark values of this rocky base. You can see there's some of it missing here. That's because I actually tilted the rocky base and the rocky base line work after painting this in. So I do go back and fill that in nearer the end. The next step for me was just blocking my character, so blocking in her skin and the basic shapes of her dress and clothing and hair and what have you. And yeah, next up was just bringing in some more of the details into that, so painting out the forms of her material, bringing in some more details in the rocks. I filled in that area here. I used to struggle a lot with painting the clothing and material, and it's something it was something I really struggled with, so I practiced lots and lots to try and get this as good as possible. And I used to hate painting clothing, but through practice I feel like I've got to a level where I can at least make it look acceptable, and by doing that I now incredibly enjoy painting clothing. It's one of my favourite parts of painting, so you'll notice throughout a lot of my paintings I have this big flowing sort of dresses and cloaks and what have you. I think at this point I had actually gone back and put the line work in and then painted over the line work. So you can see in the edges here there's still some of the line work in there, and further up here there's some, and some parts around here as well, and obviously the hair. I wasn't happy with the values of this at the time, so later on, after I'd gone in and I was trying to colour the piece, I realised they weren't working, so I've gone back and changed them a bit. And what I mainly did was brighten up the background and some parts of her. But the background was an important part to me because, like I said earlier, you want the three values to be separated from each other, and I feel like before I did that, they weren't separate enough. So I've gone back and done that. And if I open up this folder and turn all of these layers off, you can see where I started to bring in colour. So this is where I start talking more about my process with the colouring and how I paint. I normally start off in black and white. For me, I find it's much easier to get my values right if I'm painting just in black and white. and that then improves my piece later on. It improves the colours and it improves the composition of the painting. So the first thing I've done here is bring in a gradient map adjustment layer. I use the gradient maps because you can basically pick along this slider which value you want to select. So if I select all the way down here, as you can see, that's going to select all of my darkest values in my painting, and then I can change the colour of that, which will then create all of those values to be that colour that I've chosen. So for this one, I just wanted to bring in almost like a underpainting that you'd see in a traditional painting for the background, that sort of warm feel. So I've gone for that one, and I've put that on a soft light layer and reduced the opacity a bit. If I put that back to a normal layer, you can see what it looked like before, which wasn't exactly the effect I was going for, but soft light worked well. The next one was a hue and saturation adjustment layer, which was basically, I'd seen an image on Pinterest, I believe, of a Asian woman where the background was almost completely void of colour. It was white with a slight sort of creamy hint, and she had incredibly pale skin, but then she had this headdress that set off the colour of her skin because it had really saturated reds in it, and she was wearing clothing that was really saturated turquoise, and I thought the colours worked so well together. So this was the kind of look I was going for with this. I had a lot of difficulty getting the colours to look right in the beginning of this, and I went for a lot of different colour choices before settling on this one. So what I did with this one is I just wanted to drop the saturation as much as I could so that you still get a slight creamy colour, but it's going to basically wash out my values a bit in the background and really make this character stand out. Because if you'll notice, I'm using a layer mask to cut out the character from these adjustment layers. So this first one, you can see it doesn't make any difference to my character. Neither does this one, it's just the background I'm affecting at the moment. This one is another hue and saturation adjustment, which I just used to bump up the lightness of the sky for the painting. Again, increasing that separation between the values and to really make her stand out. And I've used the layer mask again to prevent it from affecting my character or this foreground rocky area. Next up is where I start bringing in some of the colour. So I wanted to keep the background, so the sky and the rock, fairly desaturated and void of colour. Apart from the shadows, I wanted to bring in with the nice, rich, warm colours. So for this one, I've again used layer mask to cut out my character, but I've used a gradient map which only has one colour. So my gradient map on this one, I've selected all these grey ones to be a 50% value, and everything is that apart from this one colour I wanted, which I've put here because it then brings up these darker tones. But I haven't put it completely dark. I wanted sort of my closer dark but not my completely dark values. So you can see how that works. If I move that to there and move that up, it'll just be my darkest values. The way I have it is darkest and then encroaching into the mid-tones a bit. And with that it's just sort of a warm colour. Now, the reason I've set the greys all around it to 50% is because then if I put this on a soft light layer, in fact no, if I go back to a normal layer, you'll see what it does. It pretty much covers everything in that 50% grey. If I put this on a soft light layer, that 50% grey then disappears. So with soft light layers, hard light layers, and possibly vivid light, I'm not sure how that one works, but with soft light and hard light, it affects everything that's over 50% and everything that's under 50%. So with soft light, if you have a colour that is over 50% value, it will then brighten that value that's below it. If it's below 50%, it will darken that value that's below. But if you put it dead on 50, it won't affect the value below it at all. So if I've got that dead on 50 and it has no saturation, you won't see the grey at all. Which means I can basically select out portions of my painting that I want to bring this colour into using the gradient map, and then have everything else stay as it was. So as you can see, that only affects those areas. So next up for me was bringing in some more of these red tones. This again using the same technique with the grey, just to bring in a little more red into those shadows. And again, I'm using the layer mask on all of these so that I don't affect my character. This again is bringing some warmer tones, and I've gone for, I believe it's this gradient map, just to bring in some warmer tones into that rocky base. And again cutting out the character. And next is where I start bringing in some of the colour. So this was for this part of her dress. So again, I've used the layer mask to cut out everything else and make sure it only affects this part of her. And again, that's a gradient map. I wanted the turquoise colour, like I said, of that picture I found on Pinterest, but as well I wanted to offset that by bringing in some purples into the shadows and then turquoise in the rest of it. And I've kept that on a normal layer and just reduced the opacity down to 40%. It's just a normal hard light layer. So when I'm painting in the skin, I will usually go in with a hard light layer, reduce the opacity a bit and just paint in some of the colour for my skin tones. If I put this back on a normal layer and bump up the opacity, you can see it's sort of off green, yellowy sort of colour, which again sort of fitting with that creamy sort of colour of everything else. And I wanted her skin to look really pale but also sort of creamy and bring in some nice sort of greens and red tones. Next was just a value adjustment just to bring out some of that skin a bit. Again, I'm using layer mask so that I can keep my adjustment just in that area. So I got some strange effects when using gradient maps on these bottom parts here. I use a lot of cross hatching to paint in my values, and you can see how they ended up with a strange effect when I brought in the gradient maps. So I just went over some of those with a normal layer, a normal brush, just painting in. Next is some more gradient maps to bring in some more of those rich red colours into this rocky part. Another one just to bring in some red shadows onto this part of her dress. Next up is another hard light layer to bring in some colours of the rest of the material and her staff. And from there, it was just a matter of painting in some of the final details. So if I zoom in on her face, because you can see the gradient maps have affected the colour on the face as well as the values on her face. The main thing being it's created all of these areas which should be dark, almost black. Inside her ears should be sort of oranges and red colours, her lips, inside the nostrils. It's basically flattened out the colours and there's not much hue variation. So I go in then with a normal brush and paint out some of those parts, changing the colour quite substantially, painting the dark parts of her eyes. I painted in all the hair, which took a very long time. Detailing out the clothing, like I said earlier, clothing is one of my favourite things to do at the minute, so detailing out these parts was, whilst it took a long time, it was a lot of fun. You can see what I've done there. I've softened up some of the edges, played around with highlights. You can also see some of my line work is still in the final painting here. Gone through and detailed the rest of the skin like I did with the face. Brought in more detail into this rocky area. A few highlights here. Fixed the rest of these odd effects that were created by the gradient map. Brought in some more values into the sky, so some lighter tones to really make her face pop out, but also some sort of cloudy effects as well. And that is the final painting for Ina. So I'd like to thank all of you for watching the video. If you like what I've done here, it'd be great if you gave me a thumbs up, left me a comment and subscribe to my channel. I've left all of my social links in the bottom, so it's Facebook and Instagram, as well as a link to my website if you want to check out what else I do. So thank you so much for watching.